Okay, we're going to make some fondant patties. This is my, I got this recipe off the internet, but I kind of modified it a little bit for what I like. But this is a double batch. The recipe that's on our website is for 3 patties, and you only use 1 bag of sugar and 16 ounces of water. This is 32 ounces of water, and you're going to put 2 bags of 4 pounds or 8 pounds of sugar in. So you put that in a pan. It has to be a good sized pan, so it won't boil over once we put it in. We turn on the water, we dump the water in, turn it on high until it starts boiling. Alright, so now we're going to add in the sugar. Again, remember, I'm doing a double batch, so if you only did 16 ounces of water, you'd only put 1 bag of sugar in. Because I have 32 ounces of water, we're doing 8 pounds of sugar, or 2 4-pound bags. Put that in and stir it so it doesn't start burning on the bottom. Get the liquid, get it dissolving as much as you can. It won't dissolve real fast, it takes a little bit of time, usually until it almost boils before it dissolves all the sugar solids. During this time you want to stir it every few minutes to make sure it doesn't start burning the bottom, the sugar on the bottom. So it's a nice creamy white, thick. So we'll let that come up to a boil, and about that time you need to be around when that does, because it does foam up at that boil point, and then it'll boil back down again just fine. But if your pan's not deep enough, it can boil over, so you need to be really careful with that. We'll be back as it starts to boil. Okay, so now it's starting to boil. This is where it froths up, and if you have it in too shallow of a pan, it can boil over. Usually it'll boil up, and then it'll just kind of lose its head and drop back down and be just the liquid syrup. So now it's boiled back down again. Now it's all dissolved. All the sugar is dissolved. It's now a clear liquid of sugar and water. And then we're going to let it boil now until we get it up to the temperature right now is like 212 degrees, 217, 14 now, 214 degrees. And so we're going to wait until it's 238 degrees, and that's 238 to 240 is where we want to be, and that's when we'll take it off the heat. Now once it's boiled, we want to turn it down from high down to, I use 7 on my stove. It'll slowly build up to that, but it takes longer to, and it allows the sugar to invert. That's what we're trying to do, is break that sucrose molecule into glucose and fructose, and that's part of the heating process does that. Alright, so we got us boiling. We're at 239, which is just a little over 238. So we're ready to take this off. You can see the bubbles are kind of what they call a bubble on bubble in the candy. It's kind of the hard candy stage. You can use this kind of thermometer as well as a candy thermometer. I like this infrared style. You know, it's easy to clean, and then I turn it off. I take it off the stove, and I'm going to just set it here in the sink and let it cool down. I want it to get down to about 220 degrees, and then we're going to do the mixer to start the crystallization to have it start occurring. So I measured this. What I want to look for is the surface is only 220. Underneath it'll be a little hotter, but that's kind of my benchmark I want to hit. And then I want to, it's still kind of liquidy, starting to crystallize a little bit on the surface, and it's starting to go a little bit milky. So I don't get really big crystals. I want to beat this up with for about a minute. Okay, so I want to get it nice and frothy, running it up for, beating it for about a minute, then I can turn it off, and it'll start to do what I call the after boil. It'll start to boil again here in just a second. It'll foam up, and the crystallization process is occurring, which is putting out some heat, and it'll actually warm back up again a little bit. So here it comes. It's starting to rise up. It's going to start boiling here in just a second. There it goes. That's what I call my after boil. I kind of scrape the edges a little bit, and the crust on the edges, and get it down into the middle, and let it cook for a little bit. So it's kind of boiling down. It's still kind of boiling a little bit, but it's it's turned into this really mushy, crystallized stuff, candy basically. And after I kind of let it cool down a little bit, and then every once in a while I'll kind of beat it again. I'm trying to break the crystals down so that there's small crystals and not large ones. And I kind of keep this stuff on the side scraped off, and make sure the bottom doesn't start crusting on you, because it's colder, so it'll start to stick down there. So I can kind of scrape the bottom, keep it stirred, and then just, I've got to let it cool down now to around 180, 85 degrees. And right now it's 227, 228. And so it's got to cool down to 180. And that's when I'll add in my pollen and my Honeybee Healthy. So the Honeybee Healthy recipe is on the website as well. This is essential oils, essentially. It has spearmint in it that helps with nosema, and then lemongrass is to help the bees. Love that smell, and they don't like spearmint, so that they'll take their medicine. You put the lemongrass in there, and then I had a guy tell me that the lavender helped with the mite control a bit, so I put a little lavender in mine as well. Then I put in some bee pollen, and so the bee pollen I buy large quantities of it, but it's and we'll start harvesting our own this next year. But I buy it, and it's kind of a little grain. It's in this granule form you can see here, and I put that into a blender and pulverize it, so it kind of makes a powder out of it, like over here, so it breaks down some of those granules. And then I'll put that in. When it gets down to 180 degrees, I put pollen in and Honeybee Healthy, mix that all together, and we'll show you how that works when we get down to temperature here. So now we've got it down to under 180 degrees. We want to do that so that when we put the pollen in and the Honeybee Healthy, it isn't going to change or destroy it, ruin it. So it'll keep it something that the bees can use. What happens sometimes is when you get to this stage, it may thicken up and get really stiff, and I've already done a little bit of water in this, but what you can do, in stirring this, it's still pretty thick, and so you may want to just give it a little shot, just a little bit of water, not a lot. You can always add more water, but you can't take it out once you put it in. So, and then it'll thin it down and make it a little bit more runny. Is what you want it to be to get it into the paper plates. So that's kind of where I want it, and then I'm going to put in my pollen, and it's a 1/4 cup for a regular batch, for just 3 cups, but I'm doing a double batch, so I put a 1/2 cup in, and then I put in 2 tablespoons of Honeybee Healthy for the single batch, and because I'm doing a double batch, it'll be 4 tablespoons that you're putting in. A double batch will make 6 patties instead of 3. Okay, and I've added some water in here, so that'll help thin it down a little bit. So you don't want to get it too thin until after you've added the Honeybee Healthy in. Then I'm going to mix that all in really good. Scrape the bottom, because there'll be clumps down in the corners and stuff. And then once you've done that, you should, this is what it should look like. It should be kind of a runny consistency, but not too liquidy, too liquid. And we're going to take it over here, and because I try to, it's about 1.5 pounds. I do one, it's actually 1 pound and 7 ounces that fits in here, that equally spreads it out. So I start putting this on 1.7, and then we set that aside. Bounce it a little bit, and then do another one. Okay, so now we pour them into the plates. It'll take them a little while. They're a little soft right now, but it'll take them in the next half hour. They'll go hard. And then when you put these into your hive, you want to make sure you remove the paper plate. Do not leave the paper plate on. And there'll be a hard disc, and then or they may break into chunks, but you can set those right on top of the hive, right on the frames, right where the cluster is in the center of the hive. The bees need to be in contact with it to be able to eat it. So one other thing I didn't show you that I did is I spray these plates with a little bit of cooking spray oil, Pam, whatever, to give it so that the plate will come off easily once it's cooled off. If you have any other questions, you're welcome to email us or on our site. I think we have a little blog that talks about this a little bit as well in there, about the bee beanie that has an R6 urethane insulation foam in here, and then that has enough space here so that the bee beanie will sit down over the top of the patty and give it some space. So it gives them insulation, a top entrance, which is critical in a hive during the winter time, to have a top entrance so that the moisture in the hive can escape out of the hive. The concept is whether you use a quilt board or something like this, it's an R6 insulation value, which I think is a lot more insulation than the quilt boards are, but and a lot more compact. That's why I like this. But the quilt boards work. They're a great product and a good idea. They're just much more bulky and a little more. And for me, when I have so many hives, I can't afford to. I had 50 hives last year. To have 50 of these stacked around during the summertime, it takes a lot of space up. So to me, compactness is as important as efficiency, how effective it is. Anyway, happy beekeeping, and we'll holler if you have any questions.